Hey guys, it's Shawn McBride, jumping into a video today on what does a board of directors do? Board of directors of a corporation, of an LLC. What are these people charged with doing? What are they responsible for? We're doing a series of asking kind of some of the common business law questions that people send to me. I like to address them and to get the information out to you and build a more knowledgeable base. I will tell you over the years I've got to work with many people that have either read my blogs or seen my videos. And getting a client that comes in that's knowledgeable, that has seen the issues and is familiar is very helpful. So whether you choose to work with me or choose to work with another lawyer, or maybe you're another lawyer out there that's getting familiar with these areas, I hope you find these videos helpful and responsive and really give you some good background on these issues. That is my goal here. In that connection, if you have specific issues you want covered in future videos, drop them in the comments. I will look for trends and ideas. If there's time and availability that's appropriate for the channel, I may cover that in future videos. So one thing we hear from a lot of people is, what does a board of directors do? And I even hear this from some established business people who have been in the business world for a while. Maybe they've interfaced with the board of directors, maybe they're an officer of a company, but they don't really understand what the formality and structure of a board should be. So our goal today is to take that veil away, to get you a good idea of what a board of directors does and how they can be valuable to a business and how the roles and responsibilities vary, right? There's officers and there's boards. We're focused on the board today. But understanding the roles that everybody should have will allow us to have more effective organizations. And believe me, I've been involved with a lot of organizations in different capacities. And when you have a board that is charged with legal responsibilities but doesn't understand those legal responsibilities, it can cause a lot of tension and problems. And our goal is to provide education that hopefully avoids some of those tensions and problems before they become that. So, as always, this is not legal advice. It's for education and entertainment. It gives you some ideas. Get specific legal advice from your counsel, from whoever you're working with. As always, and you've probably seen me say this in some of the prior videos. If you haven't seen our prior videos, go check them out here on the channel. But one of the things you need to do is look at the governing documents. This is particularly important in the context of an LLC because some people believe you can't even have a board in an LLC, and you absolutely can. It's just a contractually created system. You create the board of directors in your LLC agreements, in those contracts. You build that. So particularly in an LLC, you need to go look at those documents and see, what is this board? What does it do? How does it work? There's a lot of freedom of contracts. So depending on who wrote your LLC agreement, who negotiated the LLC agreement, if you had real negotiations among your owners and members, your board might be different from one LLC to another. For corporations, there is a little bit of a statutory overlay. Typically, your corporate statute, like the Delaware General Corporation Law, Texas Business Organizations Code, whatever law you're under, will generally set up the basic functions of a board and basic board mechanisms. But then on top of that, you will have adopted bylaws if you've set your corporation up properly. I'm not familiar with any state that doesn't require bylaws. So you have bylaws of your corporation now that not only look at that corporate law, but then set specific details for your company, may add details to the corporate law. Also, your bylaws likely talk about very specific issues, particular to your company, that go in more detail than what the corporate law provides. So the corporate law provides the framework of how your board might function and what it might do. The bylaws set the detailed operating procedures, and the two usually work together. Probably beyond the scope of what we were going to cover today to talk about if there's a conflict between the corporate law and the bylaws. But if that's something you want to cover, let me know. I may pick that up in a future video. But you need to look at those governing documents. We're going to talk very generally, broadly, about what boards generally do. But the answers for each specific company are going to be in the governing documents. That's the first place I'm going if I'm given a governance issue. Other than just generally, if somebody called me tomorrow with a company I wasn't familiar with, I'd listen after I checked, after we talked about conflicts and other things. I'd listen to the issue and I'd think generally, but then the first thing I'm doing when I'm going to do a detailed analysis is go to those governing documents. And that's where you're going to really find what the actual rules are for the actual company. What does a board do? One major function of the board is to oversee the company, right? So if you have a true board of directors, given the powers typically given to board of directors, one thing that board's going to be doing is overseeing the company. They kind of are the watch guard. They keep an eye on the company and its operations. It's very helpful for me when I was taking corporate law in law school. The professor analogized it to the way our government worked. And for those of you familiar with the U.S. government system, the corporate law system is also very similar. The shareholders are the ultimate beneficiaries of the corporation. Assuming that we're a regular corporation, not a B corporation, which is a whole different issue we can cover in a different video. But if we're a regular corporation, we're looking and talking to our shareholders, and we're seeing what's best for the shareholders. That's part of the duty of the board. Much like the government is supposed to be looking out for what's best for the citizens. Now, the citizens and the shareholders can't be involved in everything because they have other things going on in life, right? And many of them don't want to be hands-on. So you elect a board of directors. And the board of directors is very similar to our elected officials, the Congress, the president, your state legislature, right? You put this body in place to oversee things because you can't oversee everything. Exact same, very similar analogy, right? And then just like the board of directors will hire officers and other people to carry things out, the Congress and the Congress and the president and the executive branch will hire administrative employees to carry out the things that they need to carry out as far as governmental projects. So it's a very parallel and similar structure. So the board sits there kind of in that middle role, much like Congress. Their job is to oversee the company. What's happening? Are we headed the right direction? How are we deploying assets? Do we need to change how we're deploying assets? How are we positioned in the market? How do we change our positioning? Usually from a very high level, right? So they're not going to be looking at a particular marketing campaign, but a board might, in a larger company, a board might be meeting to talk about, should we be in the jet fuel industry? Should we be selling jet fuel or should we be selling regular gasoline, right? If you're an energy company, these are board level decisions, major things, right? Should we be moving to battery power versus refining fossil fuels? Board level decision, right? Major strategic decisions, overseeing where the company is going, is where the board is going to get involved. And then, of course, as things come up, they'll take on some other responsibilities, which we'll jump into here in a minute. That board sets that strategic direction. What do we want this company to look like in 5 years, in 10 years? What is our goals? What do we think is realistic in terms of the market, in terms of our market share, in terms of what's happening geopolitically, what's happening as far as technology trends? Where do we think the company is going to go? And what do we need to do to set the course to take the company where it needs to go? That's the type of big decision making the board should be doing. They're looking at the big picture, and they're looking at how the company sits in that big picture. And in a good board, you've got a diversified group of people, hopefully with different opinions, different ideas, but then they're going to reach a consensus about what the direction of the company is. And it's usually one person, one vote on a board. But that can be modified. There are situations where people either through contract, bylaws, or otherwise allow certain people to have either more votes, more power, or even veto authority. But the board is setting that strategic direction for the company. They're also dealing with and changing officers and management. To run the company, you need those employees. You need administrative type people. You need people that are carrying it out, because the board should usually be dealing with strategic issues. Probably only, unless there's a special situation going on, a board might be meeting once a quarter. So every 3 months, right? So they're not in there every day. They're not there regularly. They're having these formal meetings. They might be prepping for meetings. They might be discussing some issues between meetings. But by and large, the board is focused on big picture directional issues. But they do have to get officers and managers. You usually have a CEO, CFO. You have people that are running things. The board is in charge of those people. Those people answer up the chain to the board. And the board can either correct those officers or replace them, right? If they don't like the direction the company's going, they may fire the CEO and hire a new CEO. The board may also have to have more meetings in an emergency situation. If the CEO unexpectedly leaves, you'd probably have informal discussions among the board and then eventually convene a board meeting to hire a new CEO, to figure out who out of all the resumes they get and who all the possible candidates, who they're going to hire. And you probably have a committee, that committee of the board, which is a subset of the board, that probably negotiates the pay package of the officer or director who's incoming. If you're interested in committees and how they work and how they're a subset of the board, we could do a separate video on that. I always look at the comments again, so love when you guys comment, love when you add ideas, and if there's specific things we want to cover in the future, I would love to hear from you about what you'd like to see. So a big piece of the board is to get the right officers at the top of the organization. The board can hire, fire, change those officers, give those officers guidance, so that they can then build the right company culture and hire the right employees to work for them. So you can see the board is kind of at the top of the pyramid. They are the ultimate answer. They're the last answer before we get to the actual shareholders. Boards also approve major transactions. What they approve will be a matter of back to those corporate documents, the LLC agreement, the bylaws, the state corporate statute, etc. And the board is going to be charged with some major transactions, a merger, issuance of stock, things that happen regularly or don't happen regularly, don't happen every day, but are strategic to the business. The board usually has to approve it. And then often, depending on your corporate statute, bylaws, etc., you then have to also get shareholder approval. But the board is usually going to be the first layer of approval of a transaction before it's sent out to the shareholders. So as major transactions come up, the board's usually informed. They, as a board or a subcommittee of the board, will probably be involved in the major transactions like a merger, negotiating the merger, seeing what the proposed terms are, getting to a definitive agreement. And then once you get to that level, then generally it goes back up to the whole board who can vote on the issue. So anytime a major transaction is coming up, your board is probably going to get involved, and they're eventually either going to vote yes or no to it. The board also sets up the system for day-to-day. It's their job as kind of the overseers of the company to make sure the company is set up for day-to-day success. Hiring the officers, as we talked about, monitoring those officers. Also big things like where's the corporate headquarters at? Should we build a new corporate headquarters building? Should we build a new manufacturing plant? The big decisions that go into the day-to-day, right? The smaller decisions are probably going to be made at an officer level away from the board. Which supplier do we use for stationery? Who do we hire to, as an exterminator around the exterior of our building, right? Day-to-day things are probably going to get decided by officers, and the boards probably won't have much familiarity with that. But it is the board's job to set the company up for day-to-day success, to help lay those infrastructure points. And you may have some officers that are appointed to carry out some of these things. For instance, most companies are going to have CEO, technology officer, CTO, operations officer, CFO, financial officer. The board is doing all the things to lay the pieces to set the system up for success, right? So the board level at the top needs to set the company up for day-to-day success. In general, the board needs to do what's best for the company. That's what we call fiduciary duties, and you may see that word floating around a lot in corporate law. It becomes very important. The board, while they have the ability to make judgments and decisions within that fiduciary duty, their job is generally to do what's best for the company and the stockholders, right? They need to manage the company for success, fulfilling its corporate mission, and also generally increasing the profitability and value for the stockholders. So they will be charged with decision making in that capacity. And indeed, if they don't do that, they can open themselves up to liability. Liability not just for the company, but potentially personal liability. This is where indemnification, D&O insurance, some other provisions you might see floating around some of these documents become so critical because often these directors want to be assured that if there is a lawsuit, that they can get some degree of protection from losing their personal assets. But in theory, under corporate law, they are generally in a situation where their personal assets may be exposed for not doing the right things as a director. So they got to do what's best for the company, and hopefully a good board is always thinking in terms of that. Now, fiduciary duties can raise a host of complex issues, especially when conflicts of interest are present. Again, if fiduciary duties is something you're interested in, another potential topic for a future video, so we'd love to talk about that. The board is that top level piece of the company, right? They are kind of a leader of the company. They are the strategic house. And that's what we need to remember when we're talking about a board. A board is the big picture. The board is the foundation of setting the direction of the company. And then the officers carry that out. In smaller companies, these roles can get confused. But in bigger companies, it starts becoming more clear that allocation of authority between the levels. So hopefully this is helpful for you. I would love to read your comments. Drop them below. Let me know what more you need to know about boards and how they function, and maybe we'll work that into a future video. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Hope you subscribe to the channel and drop us a like to let us know we're doing good work. Catch you soon.